Cool. Hi there, I'm Frater IAC, and this video is for the Bardon community on Perseus Arcane Academy. The video is about making and exalting a fatty liver tincture. Now, we've spoken at some length about fluid condensers. Um, a fluid condenser is essentially a talisman. Bardon defines fluid, as all of you know, as elemental energy. So there's the electrical fluid and the magnetic fluid. So the electric fluid's the active elemental energy of fire and the magnetic fluid of water. So he calls them fluids because they can be directed in certain ways by the megas. So a fluid condenser is essentially a storage battery for the energy of magical intent. These are also known as talismans. And I've been working with talismans and healing tinctures for many years before I even heard of Bardon. But the thing is, on these healing tinctures, the things that Bardon teaches in his Initiation into Hermetics can take the preparation of a healing tincture to the next level. And that's what we're going to be doing in this video. So we've been over the ground before on these talismans and these plant-based fluid condensers. But what about healing? What about healing? Because, gosh, if you're like me, one of the main reasons that drew me to accept the call and actively pursue learning about magic was I desired to heal. I wanted to heal both myself and others, right? So that's a big part of the reason why I got into it. And I don't know why you got into it. What do you want out of, what does the great work look like to you? But my mission has always been helping. I help people. I provide good and loving service to the life and collective soul of the people. I'm a guardian of the heart, speaking for myself. Um, so I was always interested in healing. I wanted to learn more. So we have to start with a mandatory disclaimer. And not to be negative, the reason that's listed as number 2 on here, you might be on medications and supplements that can interact adversely with whatever medications you're on. You need to talk with your doctor about, okay, I want to do a fatty liver tincture. I'm going to use Schisandra berries, ginger root, and licorice root, and I'm going to make this tincture, and I'm going to take a dose of it every day. What do you think of that? And your doctor is probably going to say, well, it's not going to hurt anything, but talk to your doctor first because you want to make sure it's not going to react adversely or interact adversely with medicines you're on. But the second reason, which I have listed as number 1 up here, is the medical and pharmaceutical establishments in the United States, because we have a monetized healthcare system, the fiduciary responsibilities of those C-suite officers in medical and pharmaceutical establishments that are publicly traded is always and only to generate shareholder profits. And that's a true statement. Reference the 1919 Michigan Supreme Court ruling against Henry Ford in favor of the Dodge brothers, and you will understand the doctrine of shareholder primacy. And so the medical and pharmaceutical establishments will fiercely protect their prerogatives for financial reasons. So if somebody comes out and says, oh, yeah, this is an herbal supplement, it's great, it works, they will sue simply because it may cut into their market share and thus adversely affect profits. So again, talk with your doctor first if you're going to make fatty liver tincture. Now that said, we're going to be using a recipe from Nicole Appelian in The Forgotten Home Apothecary. And I'm going to picture the cover of that book on a subsequent slide, so don't worry about it. But we're going to be using Schisandra berries, and they've been used in traditional Chinese medicine for centuries. They support liver health by acting as an antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, and anti-fibrotic agent. Studies in Western laboratories suggest they can help detoxify the liver by boosting the activity of enzymes like cytochrome P450 and increasing the level of protective compounds like glutathione. So Schisandra berries are pretty good for the liver. They may also help manage conditions like hepatitis or drug-induced liver injury, otherwise known as cirrhosis of the liver. But more large-scale human studies are needed to confirm these effects before they can be put into our healthcare system as a credible medicine. Uh, Ginger root has, again, in Western laboratories, demonstrated potential benefits for liver health, particularly in the context of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, NAFLD. Now, the reason I'm putting this up on Perseus is I am one of 25% of the American population that has fatty liver disease. I cannot speak for other countries, but in the United States, 25% of us have that. Why? Because a lot of the foods we eat have trans fats, they're processed, and there are food preparation in the United States um, is such that in Europe, in some areas in Europe, they don't allow certain things that American food producers, food manufacturers will add. Um, but in the United States, 25% of the people have fatty liver disease. And that is caused, again, by ingesting a lot of processed foods, or it is thought to be caused by that. Um, and then the third ingredient here is licorice root, especially its active compound glycyrrhizin. Now, CYRR is a root word meaning liver. So pretty interesting there. It shows promise. It doesn't say it does. It says it shows promise in supporting liver health, particularly for conditions like non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Studies suggest it reduces liver enzymes, improves insulin resistance, and decreases oxidative stress in individuals with NAFLD. It also demonstrates the hepatoprotective effects in animal models, potentially preventing alcoholic fatty liver and reducing liver damage from various insults. Okay, so there you have it. Those are the ingredients we're going to be using. They have been partially studied in Western laboratory settings enough to suggest that they may be helpful in treating fatty liver disease. But talk with your doctor first. So here we go. Now let's get into the fun stuff. We're going to be using the fatty liver tincture recipe in this book, but with a Bardon twist. Now, Nicole Appelian is a PhD, and she has been an herbalist for 30 years. And so she has created this book that has 250 recipes of all kinds of different tinctures and infusions and decoctions and, all kinds of stuff that you can use to supplement or improve your health to treat medical conditions. So, and she also has a disclaimer in her book about, talk to your doctor first. So I know all of you are going to do that before you make this fatty liver tincture and begin using it, as so you should. So anyway, here is the actual page in the book that has the recipe. Couple of things. Um, Fatty liver disease is medically termed hepatic steatosis, and it's condition characterized by the accumulation of excess fat in the liver, which leads to inflammation and potential liver issues over time. Conventional medical treatments and lifestyle modifications are essential for managing fatty liver disease. Incorporating supportive herbal remedies may offer additional benefits. So, this herbal blend features 3 herbs traditionally used for liver supportive properties. So, there are 2 parts of schisandra berries, 1 part dried licorice root, and 1 part grated ginger. And then you're going to use high proof alcohol like vodka, or I use Everclear, I use grain alcohol, or a vegetable glycerin for an alcohol free option. Now, here's her disclaimer. She says consult with your healthcare provider before, especially if you have a medical condition or are taking medications. And that really is important. Um, Pregnant and breastfeeding women should consult their healthcare provider before using this tincture and consider reducing alcohol consumption and avoiding processed foods high in unhealthy fats to further support liver health. So, according to Apellion, this is part of a holistic healing approach. In case you're one of the, let's see, 300 million, so that's 75 million Americans. So maybe 80 or 90 million Americans now that actually have fatty liver disease. That's a lot of people. So, what you're going to do, she says, is you're going to measure the dried herbs, which is the schisandra berries and the licorice root, um, using the parts method. 2 tablespoons of schisandra, 1 tablespoon licorice root, 1 tablespoon of grated ginger. Those are the parts. It's 2 to 1 to 1. So I'm making a bigger batch, so I'm going to be using more than a tablespoon to measure out my herbs. And you're going to put them into a clean glass jar, a mason jar. Then you're going to pour high proof alcohol or vegetable glycerin, and you're going to store it in a cool, dark place for 4 to 6 weeks, shaking it gently every few days to help with the infusion process. This is called, with alcohol, this is called maceration. And then you're going to strain out the solids after 4 to 6 weeks. You're going to strain the liquid through a fine mesh strainer. And, you're going to have to strain it several times. You don't just strain it once. You're going to try and get as many of the solid coagulates out of that and leave as pure a liquid as possible when you do the straining. Then you're going to store the tincture in a dark glass bottle to protect it from light, and you're going to label the bottle with the date and ingredients. So there you have it. This is the recipe we're going to be using, but with a Bardon twist. So what is the twist? Well, in Hermeticism, we have Paracelsus. And Paracelsus was a physician and Hermetic practitioner in the 1500s. And Paracelsus discovered a way using alchemy to separate plant materials into their 3 fundamental principles known as soul, spirit, and body: sulfur, mercury, or salt. So then he recombined them to make a more potent medicine, with the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. And he called this alchemical process exaltation. Essentially, what Paracelsus learned to do is to awaken the plant materials at the astral, mental, and causal levels during the alchemical process and then recombine them so that essentially you have awakened the consciousness of those ingredients to amplify their healing properties. That's what he did, right? And so what does Bardon do? Well, let's look at Bardon. Here, this is a photograph of Franz Bardon in the Naturopathic College in Munich, Germany. And he went to that college in the probably late 30s and early 40s. He graduated in 1941. Then he served as a hospital administrator for a time in Opava. And of course, he was also interned in Auschwitz. And he actually escaped from Auschwitz, and then he went back to Opava, his hometown, in what's now the Czech Republic, and practiced until he was captured and killed by the Czech secret police in 1958. He was killed in July 1958. So anyway, according to Occult World, Bardon developed alchemical recipes for medicine purported to have amazing powers of healing. Now, in Initiation into Hermetics, you can look at the right-hand side of this slide. Bardon actually says, in this manner, every healing method serves the purpose of restoring the disturbed equilibrium of the elements. The magnetopath, which is what he called himself as a healer, through the knowledge of the influence of the elements upon our body, has by far a greater possibility to be effective with his energies, especially when he can consciously awaken the electric or magnetic fluids to intensify and transfer them to that part of the body which has come into disharmony. And he's talking in this quote about the laying on of hands as a magnetopath. And you don't really need to lay on hands, but he has a whole chapter in Initiation into Hermetics where he talks about healing. But we're applying this to a healing tincture that we are now making, more in subsequent slides. So now, let's say you are an independent kind of an individual and you want to grow your own herbs. That is good practice, and if you can do it, you should. And, there are hydroponic techniques or aeroponic techniques that you can use to grow these things indoors, regardless of what growing zone you're in. So, study up on that if you're interested in having your own herb garden, which again is a great idea. But and here's the zones where they grow. So you can see that Schisandra berries are native to Asia, but they can grow in zones 4 through 9. And so that's this purple in the northern part of the United States, down to the yellow, down to the orange here in coastal Texas and peninsular Florida and along the west coast in California and in some areas of Arizona. Ginger thrives best in zones 9 through 12. Licorice in zones 7 through 10. So if you want to grow these outdoors in an herb garden, you're going to be in this brown, this orange, this gold orange section along coastal Texas or in California or in peninsular Florida. If you're in another area of the United States, you got to have a greenhouse or, so on. But you can do it. And this map, by the way, is courtesy of a site called Botanical Interests. But these are the USDA hardiness zones. That is the U.S. Department of Agriculture, by the way, for non-American viewers of the video. So again, we're going to start by having all our ducks in a row. I call this the 5 Ps, and I have spoken in interviews with James on Perseus about the 5 Ps, so I won't belabor it, but it stands for proper preparation prevents poor performance. The 5 Ps will help you throughout your life, and they will help you across the board. Always get your ducks in a row before you start something. That's essentially what we're saying with the 5 Ps. So, you're going to need a mason jar. You're going to need a Pyrex measuring cup. You're going to need some Everclear. You're going to need some Aurum Metallicum, which we'll talk about on a later slide. And you're going to need an old-fashioned grater. That's what you got to have, plus the ingredients. Now, here's your ingredients. And remember, the recipe we're using today calls for 2 parts of Schisandra berries, 1 part licorice root, and 1 part grated ginger root. So I essentially used a cup of Schisandra berries because I'm using a quart mason jar. So I have 1 cup of Schisandra berries, half a cup of licorice root, and half a cup of grated ginger root. You combine that and you smother it with alcohol in the jar. Then you shut up the jar and put it in a cupboard for 6 weeks. And every couple of days you take it out and shake it. Okay, good enough. Very straightforward. Very simple. But what about the Bardon twist? We talked about that. We're going to exalt it. So let's talk now about getting the ginger ready. Because by far the biggest hassle in this recipe is your ginger root. Because again, the recipe calls for ginger root, and this is what it looks like when you buy it at your market. So you got to get it ready because you can't just, it's got this hard skin on the outside and you got to remove that. Well, how do you remove it? Well, first of all, you take a knife and you peel off that stuff, that external skin, and you're left with pieces of ginger that look like this. Okay, good enough. Now let's move on. Oh my goodness, now we have to grate it. And so we're going to grate it using that grater that I pictured on the slide before. And here's how it comes out. It's got these fibers in it. And you're going to grate this and then you're going to cut up the remains, and make sure you've got your entire half cup. That's a half cup measure. And so I'm going to fill up that half cup measure with the grated ginger root. And then I'm going to combine it in the jar with, and of course, you see my kittens. They're 5 years old now. It's a Siamese and a Tortie. Uh, but you also see, in this case, I'm using Emerald Springs 190 proof grain alcohol. I've got my mason jar labeled. It's a quart mason jar, and it's labeled fatty liver tincture. And I'm going to combine the 3 ingredients, the cup of Schisandra berries, the half cup of dried licorice root, and then the half cup of grated ginger root. And I'm going to cover that with alcohol, and I'm going to put the lid on the jar. That's how you do it. And then during the six weeks, you're going to get it out every couple of days and shake it to better mix the ingredients. But that's where you also add your Bardon twist. And then at the end of the 6 weeks, when you strain out the solid plant material and have a liquid left, you're going to chemically exalt that in order to keep the charge that you've charged the fatty liver tincture with in your Bardon practice. Okay, so here we go. Let's talk about that. More on the Bardon twist. Every object, Bardon says, down at the bottom of the slide here, every object can be influenced with the help of the imagination and the will, whether it is loaded with the electric or magnetic fluid, or whether it is loaded with the elements or the akasha. He says that on page 281 of his Initiation into Hermetics, Kindle edition. So here's the jar of tincture, and this is how it looks right after you make it. Um, so that's how the jar looks right after you make it. As time goes by and you go through the 6 weeks, though, it's going to be harder and harder to see the solid materials in the jar, and the liquid in there is going to become basically black. And you're not going to be able to see through it. It's very opaque. Um, so this little fellow is charging. I've been working with the letters in Key to the True Kabbalah since probably the last quarter of 2023. So I've been doing that for a little while, and I have learned a bunch of stuff working with those letters. And one of the things is your chakras have a purpose, you know, and so when you're charging this tincture with your magical intent, which is essentially awakening the curative properties of the Schisandra berries, the licorice, and the ginger root, you're awakening the astral, mental, and causal portions of that plant material to amplify its power in healing. That's what you're doing here, right? And so you're going to go into a meditational state, and some people call it an akashic trance. So you're going to, what I do if when I'm doing this is I have a special prayer that I use to invoke the Godhead and surround myself with akasha, and then I use what is called the vertical cross method of charging the material. And you can read about the vertical cross method in Tomberg's brilliant book. Valentin Tomberg wrote as anonymous. He wrote a book called Meditations on the Tarot, A Journey into Christian Hermeticism. And in his discussion on the Hierophant card in the tarot deck, he talks about this vertical cross method. And essentially, what you're doing is lifting your intent to the divine mind, and with the in breath, you're bringing the manifestation of that intent back down to yourself, but you're holding the tincture, so it's part of it. And so you will enter the tincture in its depth point, and you will draw in these awakened healing properties with this vertical cross method. And what you're doing here, you're activating your ajna chakra, because that's the crown, and the ajna chakra are the fiery will. I mean, that's where your will is housed in the human body. The throat is the word. That is the utterance of your word, whether it's aloud or merely intent. You're using your throat chakra. And then the solar plexus chakra, of course, is the chakra that corresponds to the liver, and also the chakra that corresponds to your intent, or the will that you have worked on over and over and over, exercise after exercise. You have built your will. The will is essential to any magical operation. You have to have a powerful will. So when I'm sitting and charging this tincture, I'm going to activate my crown and ajna chakras. I'm going to utter the word, which is my intent, and I'm going to project that from the solar plexus chakra uh, up along that vertical cross, and then I'm going to bring down the manifestation of that intent into the tincture. So that's what I'm going to do there. That's the Bardon twist. Um, and Bardon actually says that in Initiation into Hermetics. He says every object can be influenced with the help of the imagination and the will, whatever you're going to load it with. So that's what Bardon says, and that's what we're going to do. That's what you need to do with this if you know how to do this. And even if you don't know how to invoke the Godhead and put yourself in an Akashic trance, you can still just do a simple prayer and you can just sit there. You can go into a state of focused meditation. You can focus on the tincture and you can imagine that you are imbuing that, you're awakening it at the astral, mental, and causal levels to amplify the healing properties. That's what you're doing. So now, let's move on. Oh my goodness, when the 6 weeks is up, you still have a thing to do. You're going to take out your tincture when the time comes. And I usually go a whole 6 weeks when I'm preparing a tincture like this. And I'll shake it every couple of days and do the focused intent to amplify its healing properties. And then when I take it out after that 6 weeks has elapsed, again, it's going to be nearly black. You're not going to be able to see the herbs like you can in this photo. Because it's going to be nearly black. And you're going to use your strainer and you're going to strain out the solid materials. And again, you're going to have to strain it a couple of times. You just don't just run it through a sieve once. You're probably going to use the sieve, then you might use some paper towel, and strain it through. But the point is, you're going to get all of the solid material out that you can, leaving just a liquid. Now, you're going to use aurum metallicum to perform a chemical exaltation. You have sat with the tincture day after day, or 2 days after 2 days during the 6 weeks, to charge this with the intent that it is a powerful, it's amplified, its healing properties are amplified in terms of detoxifying and healing your liver, right? So now you're going to pour in that aurum metallicum. And I have the dose down here. I have a quart mason jar. So I'm going to use about 23 drops of aurum metallicum to every 8 ounces of tincture. Now, Bardon, in his Initiation into Hermetics, some of you may correct me, but I don't think he ever plainly states just what adding gold does to a tincture, but he does say that every magician should make certain that he has some gold available, since every liquid fluid condenser should be supplemented with a small amount of gold. But again, he doesn't really say why. My conclusion is that you've sat there for 6 weeks with this mason jar of tincture and you've meditated with it. You have infused it with your intent. You have used the vertical cross method of charging to amplify its healing properties. Now you have to cement that charge. You have to help it hold that charge. It's like you're making it into a storage battery with amplified healing powers, and the aurum metallicum keeps that charge intact. That's what I think it does. So anyway, you're gonna put in these 23 or 24 drops of aurum metallicum to every 8 ounces of the tincture, the liquid that you have. Don't add it while you still have the plant material in there. You want to do it after you strain the plant material out. You add your aurum metallicum, and that holds in the charge, the amplified healing properties of that tincture. So you're essentially using a method of alchemy to exalt these healing properties. That's what you do. That's the Bardon twist. So, what's the dosage? Well, I've been taking this for, gosh, upwards of a year now, and I do feel better. And my blood work when I go to the doctor has improved. Um, My blood pressure has improved. I just feel healthier. Um, and so I usually put about 2/3 of a teaspoon full of the tincture in 20 ounces of water. So I usually buy a little bottle that has an eyedropper in it that's 4 ounces. That's how I keep my tinctures. And then I put I store the mason jar that has the rest of the tincture usually in the refrigerator, so that it stays good and holds its charge because it has the aurum metallicum in it as a chemical exaltation. And I'll keep the mason jar in, but I use the 4 ounce jar with an eyedropper. And in a 4 ounce jar, that eyedropper is going to take up, when you squeeze it and fill it with fluid, it's going to take up about a third of a teaspoon out of the jar. So I usually use 2 droppers full from a 4 ounce bottle. And then I charge the water using the C letter, which is the letter of the Eucharist in Key to the True Kabbalah. I will charge the water using the C for liver detoxification and health. So there you have it. This is how to do a fatty liver tincture. This is the last slide. If you do this tincture, let me know how it works for you. Again, talk with your doctor first, but this is a way to make a really excellent, what I think, a really excellent and effective fatty liver tincture with a Bardon twist. Good day and goodbye.